we are going to do today is we're actually going to verify identities. So instead of giving you something that looks like this, tangent of x plus cotangent of x, I'm going to actually tell you what it's the same as. So I'm actually going to give you an equation. And your job is going to be to verify that that is true. Okay? Verify that the tangent of x plus cotangent of x equals secant x cosecant x. Okay? How am I going to ask you to do that? Okay? There are three ways. You can take the left side and manipulate it until it looks like the right side. You can manipulate the right side until it looks like the left side. Or you can manipulate both sides at the same time until they look the same. Okay. Basically, your end goal is that both sides look the same. Secant equals secant. Cotangent x tangent x equals cotangent x tangent x. Whatever it is, as long as the left side equals the right side, then you have done your job. How are we going to do that? Okay. You are going to use a combination of algebra skills as well as our fundamental identities to help you get there. Okay? When I say algebra skills, adding fractions, so getting common denominators and adding them together. What else? Multiplying by the conjugate to get something out of a denominator. Okay? 8 fundamental identities. Obviously, you were practicing those a little bit in your homework, whenever you did your homework, okay, over our snow days. Going back to the algebra skills, we are not solving an equation, okay? We're making one side look the same as the other side. So you can't actually take something and move it across the equal sign. It stays on the side where it is. We're just going to change the way it looks, but we're not going to move anything across the equal sign. Does that make sense? Okay. Everything has to stay on the side that it originated. We can change the way that it looks, but we cannot move it across. Okay. Now, you will need to have some patience while working through these. And as I mentioned Monday, you're only going to get better at these the more you practice them, which is why for like the next 3 days, we're going to be practicing these. Okay? Now, I will give you some hints. Okay? First of all, just go in knowing that you're going to have to think a little bit. You might get stuck. You might have to erase. You might have to start over. Okay? But eventually, you can get there. Okay? If one side is more complicated than the other, that might be a good side to start with. Okay? If you don't know which one is more complicated, it's going to be better to start with addition or subtraction versus multiplication or division. Because addition and subtraction, we can easily get a common denominator and add things together. Knowing your identities is really going to help, obviously, okay, because you need to recognize when you can make substitutions, okay? If you see a 1 plus cotangent squared, you need to recognize that you can replace that with cosecant squared. if possible, you can try to factor. Okay, we worked on some factoring in your homework. Okay. Mentioned it before with the adding and subtracting, but if you have two fractions, you can combine them. Okay. It's also possible to break up fractions. We looked at that the other day. If you are adding or subtracting in the numerator of a fraction, we can break it apart into two fractions. Multiplying by the conjugate. Okay, we had that example Monday where we had 1 minus sine of x in the denominator. We multiplied by the conjugate, and then we had an identity to help us. Whatever you do, don't give up. Okay? I'm giving you some strategies. Okay? Eventually, you're going to have some vision. Like, okay, I've done a problem kind of like this before. I think this is going to work. Okay? But you're not going to get better at these without practicing them. So I cannot stress to you how important your homework is going to be over the next few days. Okay? Now, what I'm going to do is we're going to go through one example, and then I'm going to give you the steps to some problems that you're going to have to sort through. Okay? So we're going to do the problem that we started out with, that I had on my very first slide. Okay. We have to take one side or both sides, and we are done once they equal each other. Okay. What side do you think is going to be better to start with here? The left. Okay. What can we do to that left side?
Rewrite tangent.
We can rewrite tangent and cotangent. We can write them as the sine of x over cosine of x plus cosine of x over sine of x. And what did I do? What did I use to rewrite those? Okay. So I'm just going to make a note to myself that I use the quotient identities. Okay. Now, what can we do with those two fractions? They don't cancel out because we're adding. Oh. How can we add them together? If we have common denominators, okay? So, I'm going to make common denominators. And once we have common denominators, what can we do with our fractions? We can add them together. So what we have is sine squared plus cosine squared over our common denominator. So we combine fractions there. Does anybody see something kind of nice? What do you see, Sean?
Top, we can make it a 1.
Ah, sine squared plus cosine squared is 1. Okay. That is a Pythagorean identity. Okay. should be something that you look for often. Sine squared plus cosine squared. It's going to pop up all over the place. All right, we're almost there. What do you notice? Okay, what's 1 divided by sine of x? Cosecant. And what is 1 divided by cosine x? Okay, and what identities did we use there? Okay, now technically are our two sides equal?
Yes.
Yes, but do they look exactly the same? Do they look exactly the same? Okay. I do not want you to stop until both sides look identical. And once they are identical, then we are done. Yes.
At this step, like 1 over sine,
Uh-huh.
could you have just gone to the other side and put them over 1?
Yes, that is a very good point, okay? We don't have to just stick with one side. Kyler asked here, could we have just gone to the other side and written those as 1 over cosine, 1 over sine? Yes, you could have, okay? It doesn't matter if you stick with one side or if you do both sides. It's whatever you feel comfortable with, okay? Some of you are going to want to save room and work with both sides at the same time. What I'm going to ask that you do, though, is give me the reasons for all of your work. That way I can follow what's going on. Okay? Yes.
We have to include that second to last step because you could go from the third to last step to the very last step.
Here to here?
Yeah. Like you could just switch them around, the sine and cosine.
So you're talking about doing the commutative property at the same time as doing the reciprocal?
Yeah.
Yeah, you probably could do that, and that would be fine. Okay. It's okay to do a couple steps at the same time, but you're not going to want to do that very often, otherwise you're going to lose some things, okay? So I'm going to ask that you go step by step by step and tell me what you're doing, so that way, if there's an issue, or if I'm not following your work, I can at least go and look at your reasons and figure out what you're trying to do, okay? So here's what we're going to do. I can sit up here.
I don't know what happened.
When you are finished with your activity, you can begin your homework after I check it. So